Good morning. Welcome, Mark. It's nice to have you today.
Morning.
I wanted to kind of open this up right away and say somebody's phone's ringing. Mark is over 25 years across 6 countries. Mark's owned over 30 businesses. Mm-hmm. And I've had a few conversations with Mark, and I really enjoy his perspective, and his wisdom. And I thought, what better way to illustrate what we're trying to do with Performance Tailwinds than bring Mark in and give his perception about what business needs to do after COVID has, the response to the CCP Wuhan virus, COVID, has done to our world and our economies. And with that, go ahead, Mark, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then Dave and Ron, go ask away.
Well, thanks for that introduction, Kevin, and also it's great to be here with David and Ron. I'm originally from Scotland, living in Australia. I've had a few different careers. I mean, my first real career, other than businesses, was in casinos. And after casinos, I was a derivatives trader. So traded derivatives and then moved into marketing. So, and along the way, I've accumulated, invested in, and been involved in different businesses. And, because I've had those businesses in different countries, I think at times it gives me a unique perspective in that every country is slightly different, and you don't really know a country unless you live there. And having a holiday in a country is entirely different from actually working and living there. Mm-hmm. So there's been some interesting trips along the way.
I imagine. So where all 6 different countries? Where all have you lived?
States, but Costa Rica. So I started off in the UK, Canada, America, Costa Rica, South Africa, Australia. Is that 6? Did I miss one? So, and I'm now in Australia.
Were you kicked out of the first 5, or how did you wind up in Australia?
They wouldn't have me back, David. That's it. They said that's it. An undesirable person.
Yeah.
Yeah. So each of them is unique, and each of them is different, and how they do business and how they live, and their cultures are different. And people think obviously if you're in Australia, you've got that, you've got the same basic structures as you've got in Europe and North America. But interestingly enough, on that topic, for example, a lot of our what we know as right and wrong, where you are, is what is right and wrong here in Australia. And a lot of that comes actually from the Roman law, right? Our basics of what we think is right and wrong. But if you go into Central America and South America, where that influence wasn't there, they've got a kind of different social structure of what is right and wrong. So when you do business in those countries, you have to be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Hey, Mark.
Yep.
Mark, we did some homework on you in preparation for this discussion for our audience.
Great.
And some of the things that we learned about you is that you're an investor, a business mentor. You buy, invest, and help businesses where you think you can add value. When I do interviews, I like to always start off with, where did this all come from? What maybe it was in your youth. What's at your core that drives all this?
Well, that's a good question, Ron, actually. And I have been working and had businesses since I was 7 years of age. And my mother and father were market traders. They sold stuff in markets. And my first business was in, not sure how the language that you can use here, but working in a Glasgow market. And I figured out that when people came to the markets, they came unprepared. And I borrowed £10 and bought 1,000 plastic carrier bags at 10 cents and sold them at 20 cents. And I just stood in the street and sold them. And people hated it. They hated because they could get, it was a black bin bag sometimes that I would sell. And they hated the fact that they would pay for something that they got for free. So there was a lot of choice language there. But I've always been fascinated with business because to me it's an engine, right? So like women are fascinated with shoes and handbags or whatever, you know, or people love art. To me, a business is an engine, and I'm eternally searching for that perfect engine. How does it run? How do you make it better? How do you make it go faster? And when I observe a business that's, you know, runs like an engine and runs perfectly, I admire it. That's what I'm trying to achieve. And I'm fascinated by every type of business. So it doesn't matter whether you sell mugs or whether you sell clothes or jumbo jets or whatever it is. I mean, for example, I've taken the time to go and see how a dam works. I found a friend to show me how a sugar plantation works, and I spent the day with a chemical engineer that told me the process of how everything works. And one of the fascinating things about that was, for example, the farmers all have these walkie-talkies, and these sugar plantations in South Africa, the manager of the plantation will announce every couple of hours the price of sugar. So they have a window of 1 or 2 days in order to bring that sugar in to be refined, but they'll wait for a different price. It's like trading. But the process of how they get that is fascinating to me. So it doesn't matter whether it's a sugar plantation or a restaurant or whatever that thing is. I would rather spend time talking to people about how their business had worked than anything else. And there's you probably heard of the comedian Billy Connolly. And I read a book and it was called Wisdom, and it had all of these people in the sayings. And he was asked how he would give advice to his children, and he said, "What do you feel drawn towards? I mean, if you're in a shopping mall, what thing do you feel yourself compelled that you go there? Not because you're paid, because that's where your interests lie." So, you know, you talk about Andrew Carnegie, we were chatting just before the show. I've collected hundreds of books, thousands, in fact. I'm fascinated by how their minds work. How does a man's mind work that makes that great machine? What is the jumps and leaps that he makes in order to get from a normal entrepreneur to something that much bigger?
Wow. So let me see if I got this right, Mark. And basically, since you started businesses when you're very young,
yep,
and you're in search of a better and better engine,
a better mousetrap, yeah,
better mousetrap, and you want to find out what makes that mousetrap work so much better. But also the other thing that you just floored me with is how the mind works. You want to see what the leaders, how their minds work to pull all this off.
Yes, and actually, there was a period of time for about 9 years where I intentionally didn't have a TV and just read, and I read nearly 1,000 books and mostly autobiographies because I was so fascinated with it. I didn't have time to watch TV because I was really interested in that. I mean, if I reverse that question for you, Ron and David, to give you an example, have either of you had businesses before?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yes.
So tell me one of the businesses, David.
I started selling newspapers. So at a little older than you. I think you said you were 7. Yeah. I might have been 9 or 10, but right. Yeah, it's a great experience, and kids don't have. I mean, you can't get that experience today. And I cut grass, and did all the things that teenagers do.
Well, let's take the newspaper example.
I also.
Right?
Yep.
You can take any example of anything, and that's a basic example. But 2 questions that always enter my mind is, if you're going to, have a newspaper around, how do you get business, right? So how do you get more newspapers? You knock on doors. So that's your sales process. And what's the hard bit? What's the hardest part of that business? Because every business, particularly small business, has a hard bit. And it's the hard bit that people, if you're going to blow up a business, it's that thing that you have to identify. And maybe that's where it is, right? So whatever that thing is, how do you solve the problem, or how do you make it easier? Or how do you extrapolate and get bigger numbers from that thing? And if you take any kind of business, you're going to get to that stage. So what is the process? So one of the things that was great in the early days as a croupier or a dealer in casinos is it's very procedure orientated. So every move you make on a table when you're dealing roulette, for example, you have to show your hands to the cameras. You've got to have no pockets, no turn-ups. Every move you make is predefined. You have to move chips in a certain way. You have to pay out in a certain way and count in a certain way. And that's a process, right? So it's a procedure that you follow. So what I think, or what I'm really interested in, is what is the procedure in each business that makes it successful? Because once you've got those, processes and procedures mapped out, and you make it like a McDonald's manual that you can give to someone, then that's how you can scale a business. And if you think about McDonald's, for example, what is their staff turnover? It's something like 300% a year, something ridiculous.
Yeah.
But it's only because they invented the easy system that everything is so procedurized that they can scale, to a franchise scale. You can't do that unless you understand and map out how your engine works.
So it sounds like the E-Myth might be your favorite book.
E-Myth is good.
Yep.
So, I think it's particularly online. It's all, you probably do better online if you're an accountant, because it's all about, measuring things, building that funnel, looking at it, looking at numbers. So, most of the day for my marketing company, for example, is looking at dashboards, is looking at numbers to see, okay, well, we had so many people who looked at that page. There had so many people who opted in. We had so many people who converted at each different stage. How do you fix it and how do you make it? How do you arbitrage traffic into money? You can only do that if you understand the process and how that engine works.
So what are some of the, I guess maybe the favorite businesses that you've owned? If you said you've been into about 25 or 30, what are the ones that give you the best memories?
I've loved them all. It's nice to talk about the fancy things, but to give you something different and weird. For example, my wife and I were watching TV one day, and I think it was called, there was a women's lingerie party plan business called Victoria's Secrets. I think it's a big organization now, but in the day, it was a small thing. So and they said like they had made £50 million that year. So I said to my wife, that's a great business. You've got no overheads. It's done through party plan. You should do that. And she didn't like the idea at all. But this was on like a Sunday. On Monday, I put an ad in the newspaper to say, party pan rips wanted, earn £50 per night. That's as much as I knew about the party pan or the lingerie business at that time. But by Tuesday, I had 50 people who had inquired about it. So then I figured out, okay, well, there's a lot of interest for people who want to sell it. So I then organized a company in London that gave me the catalogs and little kits for free and gave me 30 days to pay. So I bought a book on Amazon that said how to run a party plan business. That was my total extent of knowledge on how to run a party plan business. Executed the plan that was in the book. And I owned that business for a couple of years. It did very well. And the total involvement in that business was, on Sunday, the girls would fax in the days of faxes, they would fax in their orders. I'd, put them all together, send them to London. And Tuesday, I would get all of the things that were ordered and then distribute them to the girls. And my total time in that business might have been 2 or 3 hours. So, and it was, that's why I enjoyed it, because it was literally 2 or 3 hours. Now there's, you can talk about bigger things like casinos or, marketing or mobile apps or buying property and things like that. But interesting ones, or ones that are different, interest me. So I've had as many offline businesses as online businesses. So I sometimes You know, like mail order, for example. What I found recently is that pre-COVID-19, we started a direct mail business, and we were having phenomenal results. And one of the reasons we realized we're having results is nobody gets post anymore, not real post that looks like a letter. So now people who are opening letters, and particularly if you're a bit inventive about them, in this particular campaign that we ran, we made it look like a FedEx envelope in the same size as a FedEx envelope, so that the majority of the time the person had to physically take it, rather because it wouldn't fit in a lot of boxes. And we put on there handwritten photographs inside, do not bend.
Mm-hmm.
And the results were through the roof. So we're just experimenting with that before the COVID thing, and mail slowed down now, so we've stopped. But that's interesting. So it's not so much, it's, I guess the thing that is interesting is if it's new and I don't understand it, is to, go and try it to understand it a bit better.
Mark, you caught my attention. You explain to our audience this. People get ideas. Lots of people get ideas. But it seems you have a propensity to act. The Victoria's Secret thing caught my attention. So we have this we talk about a knowing doing gap. There's so many people that have the ideas and have the knowledge, but they don't act. You're an actor. Tell us about that.
Well, look, strategy without execution is a hallucination. I can't remember who said that, but it's far better to have somebody start digging the hole and talk about it. So in every situation, I have overreached myself. I have done things that I was incapable of, and I never saw the problem. Basically, stupidity a lot of the time, I think, or just never seeing the problems that were there. But there was a great movie, I don't know if you remember it, called Apollo 13 with Tom Hanks. And he's lying in the grass and he's looking up at the moon, and he turns to his wife and he points to the moon and he says, "Do you know how we got there?" And his wife says, "No." And he says, "Because we decided to go." So my trip, for example, when I landed up in South Africa, took a letter. So the only difference between me and somebody else was I sent a letter to somebody asking if I could have a job. So in nearly every situation that I have been successful, it's because of that. Just take action. And I know that you need to plan, and I know that all of the other things, but if you had to look and identify of the people who are really successful, I think it's the fact that they made a decision in their mind to take action. It's like I was listening to Tony Robbins once, and he said that when people give up smoking, it's not because they have to be ready for it, and it's a switch. It's not gradual. They make that decision in their head that thing is done. So, and there's also a book, I think it was written by the guy who did Moneyball, that movie Moneyball, where they took all the statistics for baseball and things like that. And people are divided into basically hedgehogs or foxes, right? So a hedgehog is somebody who makes a decision, they curl up, and that's their decision. And a fox is somebody who will keep nibbling at lots of different types of information until he has enough to make a decision, and then make that decision. So I'm a great team player.
I'm more like a drunk bull in a china shop.
That gets it done too. It just gets it. So that's it. I mean, but if you were to look back, Kevin, and your past experiences, right, and you were to the three most, the things that you remember the best, they might have been spontaneous, or they might have been things that you didn't really think through, or they might have been whatever that reason is, you did it. And there's probably always somebody there who said you shouldn't do it, or here's the reason why. Lawyers and accountants are great for it. They can kill any deal,
because they look backwards. They look backwards. This is what I realized when I was launching. I was like, why is there always this friction? And in our natural lives, we have so many rescuers, so many saviors. We've got firemen, policemen, medics, all these things to protect us. In business, there's only two professions that actually protect us, and that's an accountant and a lawyer. And they're always looking backwards. I've yet to find someone that understands. I've met a few that understands you're actually creating a new market. When I started my entrepreneurial career on my own startup back in 2003 in Australia, that was my biggest hit, was because Australia wasn't ready for it yet. Pioneers get arrows in the back and settlers prosper.
Yeah, exactly. But another form of protection is a group like this. So, I mean, if you've got, if you know your strengths and weaknesses and you have a group of people like this and bring that idea to them, it's a form of protection, and you can leverage that. But I think you're right, it takes some momentum, right? Otherwise, you get people who just talk.
Mark, tell me, do you make decisions quickly or do you stew on them?
It depends on the decision. So because I've got a history of a lot of different information points, I can make decisions quickly based on that. But if for example, if there was a business that I was buying that I wasn't that familiar with, I would take the time to reach out to as many different people as I could who were in that industry, or I thought could give me advice, and look at it from 100 different angles, but then make that decision. So it depends on the decision and whether I'm confident enough that I can make a good, educated decision. And that decision-making process, by the way, Ron, is, I don't know whether you've, the critical thinking part, right? I don't know if you've heard the how many pianos are there in New York decision process. Have you heard of that?
Oh, no.
All right, so it's a part of critical thinking. So you would say, for example, if I were to say to you all, how many pianos are there in New York? How would you solve the problem?
I could estimate it if I kind of figured out, what portion of a population, plays the piano, what portion of players own a piano, and I could probably in 5 minutes get, in the right order of magnitude.
Exactly. So you would have a guess, right? You Google it, right? But if you have to make a decision, for example, you could say, how many people are roughly, you would guess how many in New York, how many people are households in New York, and how many people, what percentage of that population would play the piano. And you could even work out how many piano tuners there were. But the main thing to understand is that there's a process to making a decision, as opposed to most people who would say there's 89 or there's a guess. So I try not to guess. It's always a rational, considered decision that is, rationalized.
Yeah, I find decision making to be one of the most important characteristics of great leaders. And they're probably the least, people don't talk about decision making. It's so important. And
that's absolutely true, Ron. In fact, I think one of the great things about Jeff Bezos is the fact that he's a great decision maker. And he was being interviewed. I remember an interview where they said, "Oh, you've had a great quarter," and he said, "We made those decisions for this quarter 3 years ago." He said, everything you're seeing now was decided upon 3 years ago. And that decision-making process, he talks a lot about how he thinks about how he makes decisions. And I think a lot about it too, because I have a natural propensity to act quickly. And I have to remind myself on occasions to slow down, or to get advice, or to think that problem through. So often what I'll do is, if I have a problem, I'll make sure I don't go near a computer, and I'll pace the room, or I'll do something, right? But every major decision is never made near technology.
Right. Good God. Yeah, I'm enjoying this, Mark, because you paint, you illustrate what you're saying with pictures, and it's very vivid for me. I appreciate that. By the way, I have found how many pianos there are in New York. I'll give it to us at the end of the conversation.
Okay. And the actual example that's used a lot there, you can look it up, is how many piano tuners, right? And it was a different level.
That's where I was going, by the way.
Yeah.
Mark, you mentioned when we were chatting earlier that you had the opportunity along the way to interview lots of successful people, and like Napoleon Hill, you sorted through all of those interviews and came up with some interesting observations. Can you share that with us?
Sure. So in 1994, I had a magazine called Network. Information is power. And I'd like to think I came up with that saying before anybody else did. And my idea with that magazine was to network businessmen and to interview guys like yourself and just say, okay, so you've got a business, it's successful. Why is it successful? And then once a month to try and get people in a room to talk about doing business with each other. And for example, you know, there was a company called Heritage House, which was the biggest mail order company in South Africa at the time. There was a company that imported Zippos. There was a company that had imported satellite technology. Lots of different types of people. But for the ones that were where the entrepreneur has started and grown it, the overwhelming answer was hard work. You know, I was looking for something sexy. I was looking for a secret. I was looking for the magic bullet. But a 9 out of 10, or let's say at least 90 out of 100 people, the answer to the success was hard work. They worked harder than anybody else, and they had that ability to focus.
I think Brian Tracy came up with the same conclusion that you did.
Yeah.
I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's written the same thing. So that's interesting. That it's really disheartening that the hard work is.
I know, but if you think about it, in every business, I mean, even now, and I would not consider myself retired, but definitely easing off a bit. I mean, I'll still do 12 or 14 hours a day. I mean, I'm still busy, you know. And if you know if you're trying to make something happen, you're not going to do that in 8 hours a day. I had a friend who has a business who we were having a drink together, and he says he's thinking of selling his business because he's working too hard. And I said, well, how many hours do you work? He said 40 hours. I said, that's not a business. That's part-time, you know. So when another thing I find that when people are, if they have a normal job and they decide that they want to be an entrepreneur, if they're not the type of person who's given 100% in that job, and it doesn't matter whether you're stuffing bags, digging a ditch, or doing brain surgery, but if you're not 100% present and 100% convinced and 100% with that attitude that anything you do, you give 100%. With you right now, you have 100% of my attention, and that's how I live my life. It doesn't matter whether I'm paid for it or not, or whether I'm doing something for school or charity or whatever it is. I'm 100% present, and I give 100% or as much as I can. But if you have a job and you think, well, I'd like to start this little thing and I'm going to leave that, and you're half-hearted at your job, or you're not the star employee, your chances of success are not good.
Mark,
I think we often promote ourselves to our level of competence.
The Peter Principle.
That's the Peter Principle,
yeah.
Right? Our greatest strength is our greatest weakness, and we're exactly where we put ourselves. When
the
you
Peter Principle, yeah, that's just, you know, you get promoted to the point where you're incompetent.
Right. Yeah. That's what I meant. Yeah. Forgive me on that. When you said something that stuck with me was, and it hit me, it's kind of like a kind of punch right between the eyes, is when you said that success was determined upon how you think. And I thought to myself, oh, that's true. You know, because I immediately flashed back to my own self and thought about how I was thinking at different times of my life and through success. Could you go a little bit deeper into that? Because we are at a point in a time where the entire world has been sucker punched by, as I feel, bad business or bad scientific modeling that has shut down our businesses. And you've got a lot of people facing, you know, we're in a place we've never been before. And if somebody says this is the new normal, I'm going to sucker punch them. It's not the new normal. But what would you say to business owners as we're expanding, as we're going back out? How do we think better to approach our problems better? Because our old way of thinking isn't going to work right now. I guess that's really what I'm trying to say.
Well, you know, I think that all business, regardless of size, is 80% psychological. And so if you think of, like, traders, I used to work a lot with traders, and that's definitely the case with traders, is like 80% is psychological. So for example, with traders, they feel, and this is kind of what we're going through just now, when they make a lot of money, they think their IQ goes up, right? And when they lose money, they think their IQ goes down, they get depressed. But the reality is they're the same person regardless of the circumstance. If you're the type of guy who won't give charity any money when you've got no money, you're not going to be the type of guy who gives money when you have a lot of money. So, going through this situation, I advise the businesses that I work with, number one, you got to get real. You got to understand where you are, and it's like the 5 stages of grieving, right? I don't know if you've heard of the 5 stages of grieving. You've got denial, anger, depression, and then you try and fix the problem, and then acceptance. So when this all happened, it's a psychological thing. How well you deal with this is a psychological issue. Once you're at the acceptance stage where you know and understand that you have to take action, then you can actually do something. But if you're still depressed or blaming other people or whatever it is on that wheel, you can't take action. It's like if you have a football team and you go to the Super Bowl and you lose, right? You don't all go out and commit suicide. You go back to the drawing board and figure out how to win the Super Bowl the next time. So it will be different. It's going to look a little bit different, but how you approach this, mentally is going to be the secret to how most businesses get out there. And also to look at it honestly, if you're in a type of business that is going to be affected by this, you can't wait, wish, and want for something to change. You have to deal with the situation as it is and make decisions based on that so that you can go forward.
Mark, can I jump in?
Yep.
You talked earlier about doing your research of all these companies and having insights and learnings. I hope we get a chance later in our conversation to share some of these insights, some more of these insights with our audience. But before we do, I'm just taking notes as I'm listening to you. And we were talking about thinking. And most people use their traditional senses, smell, taste, touch, feel, hear. And that's how they trigger their thinking. But you seem to go above and beyond that. I call it your higher faculties such as reason, imagination, memory, intuition, perception, and will. You have such strong will. I believe these are so important, and you have these characteristics. What do you tell our audience tonight about how to develop these higher faculties in their lives? Because they're going to need these things to make the big changes that need to be made here.
That's a great question. And I will give you the summary of a course I teach for people who are starting in business. And it's a formula called the VSPO formula. So V stands for vision, right? So, and when you work with entrepreneurs, a lot of the time, they don't have vision. If you go into your average small business and ask them what the vision of their company or what they want to do is, they've got no idea. Their original idea was, let's just start digging. Let's just start. We've got an idea and we can make money. But at some point in time, they're going to run out of that. They need to have a vision of where they want to go. So that vision, is almost like training your mind. And part of that course is I give examples of people who, there's a great one with Mike Tyson interview that I show. And not many people know that Domata, I think was his coach, had him hypnotized since he was 13 years of age to turn him into who he was. And my point was that you can program a mind. Right? You can program a mind like you can program a computer. So it's a big conversation. So V is for vision, right?
Yeah.
And then S is for strategy. You need a strategy of how to get there. And I'm not talking about things like the secret when I talk about vision, because the failing of things like that is it tells you should just hope and pray for things without the other part, which is the action plan of how to get there. So S is for strategy. So you need the vision and you need the strategy. And then you need the people. Because if you're going to achieve anything in life, whether it's a small business or a big business, or whether you need support from your family or people around you, you're going to need to work with people. So you're going to have to be, and you take Andrew Carnegie, and some of the autobiographies I read was, and the question was asked, how did he become most successful? The answer was he was a very likable character, apparently. People liked him. It was easy to talk to. He knew how to put people together. So you get VSP and O. Now, O is maybe the one thing, and for anybody who's listening here, I can simplify your life right now, but very few people will be able to do it. And it came from, there was a rowing team in the UK, and they were in the Olympics in Sydney, but that particular rowing team, I think it was called the 8, hadn't won anything for years. And they got this coach, and the coach looked at it and he said, here's what we're going to do from now on. Every single thing we do in our life from now on, we're going to ask ourselves one question, that one decision. Will this make the boat go faster? Right? Should we get new uniforms? Will it make the boat go faster? No, we're not interested. Should we go out tonight? Will it make the boat go faster? No, we're not interested. Should we put this into a team? Yes or no? No, we're not interested. So if you want to simplify your life right now and your business decisions, ask yourself that one thing. And you can't ask that question unless you've gone through the other 2 stages, vision and strategy. People, right? Is whatever it is, will this get me to my goal faster? If you're an entrepreneur and you're selling newspapers, for example, and you want to be the biggest newspaper seller in your state, every decision you make should be, will this get me to that goal faster? Right? And then the last thing of the VSPO formula is E for execution. You got to execute. Right? So it's VSPO. So V for vision, S for strategy, P for people, O for one decision, and E for execution. You got to be able to execute, and you got to know how to execute.
What was the O again?
One decision.
One decision.
What's your one decision? Will this get me to my goal faster?
I get it.
You reduce every decision you've got to make in your life to, will this get me to my goal faster? If you want a great body, will that big bagel get me to my goal faster?
But it tastes so good.
I know.
Well done. Well done.
Terrific. That was good stuff.
I haven't had a bagel in a while.
You know, neither have I. I was like, man, a bagel with cream cheese. I'm in Asia. You know what I mean? Those things are, I mean,
You don't get them there.
You can't get, heck, you can't even get Mexican food.
You know, I think Mark, in terms of Ron, you know, because you seem to be more into the mindset of where it is, I think that we are designed to be comfortable. And anything that takes you outside of that, your body rejects, right? So you don't want to do that. You don't want to get up at 5 in the morning and deliver your newspaper. You don't want to stick to the diet. And also your brain's telling you in survival mode, don't do anything that might be dangerous. But you've got to be uncomfortable in order to make things happen. You know, if you don't feel, someone said here in Australia, if you're not hanging on by your nails, you're not trying hard enough. But I don't know if you need to go to that extremes, but you have to be, the road of uncertainty is where wealth and happiness is. If you want security and you want to go work for the government and earn a minimum wage and be secure-ish, then that gets one result. But if you want another result as an entrepreneur, you've got to be very comfortable every day with not being in charge of all of the available facts. You've got to be comfortable with being uncomfortable.
Mark, I think this is one of the challenges we have, we Performance Tailwinds have with our daily videos, is every day we bring these gold nuggets of value creation to our audience. But I think we often take our audience out of their comfort zone to think about things and feel things that they're not used to feeling. And that's, in terms of our criteria for success, we think, Dave and I think that's good. But
it's absolutely good. I mean, well, you know, how else can you do it? The thing is that most people,
well said.
You know, there. But if you have you know, like I did a course with 100 people last month with this VSPOE formula, and only about 3 or 4 really. I mean, it's a kind of declining thing. Now, that's a good example. is if you can imagine an X and a Y axis, right? So everybody thinks when they start this business that it's going to start from about zero, lose a little bit of money, and become this hockey stick and go back up, right? But on the other side, coming from the top like a train, is you've got this line that's going down, and that's money, enthusiasm, it's all of the energy. So, there's a timeline there. So if you're not successful within a certain period of time, it becomes more unlikely as time goes on.
Yeah.
So in my experience, this gradual incremental growth that people talk about doesn't really exist, because if a business is successful, it explodes and it's hard to control. And like accountants and lawyers are knocking on the doors. You haven't done this, you haven't done this. And you're so busy trying to put out fires. That's a real growth stage. But the perfect business plan that you see people, especially pre-revenue is going to look like this. That doesn't happen. But so, if you were a betting person, you would say that the majority of success or failure is going to happen in that first 6 months, where everything is there. All of your resources are there, and they deplete as time goes on, unless you get some traction and are successful.
I didn't see it that way. Whenever because I've been a serial entrepreneur and totally focused on startups for a long time. One of the main reasons I was attracted to both David and Ron was I was tired of that, because it's addictive. I'm going to say that right now. That energy is addictive. That that startup over and over again. But I found after a while that I myself was chasing a laser beam, and I thought it was momentum that had its own reward. And what you're saying is it's not necessarily that it's momentum that has the reward for success, but the point of diminishing returns between your money, your enthusiasm, and your success. So I can see that. I can see that clearly. It's not necessarily just momentum, but it's do you get to that point first? Okay.
Well, that's one of the things as well. I mean, think of startups. What's the failure rate? 90+%.
Yeah,
it's high, right?
99%.
Yeah, and one of the, there's a couple of reasons there. One is you don't know what you don't know, and they're just not smart enough to go find out. So there's a thing called no man's land in business, where somewhere between 0 and say $2 million, and it can happen at any point, but you're going to get to that point where you stagnate. You just can't grow anymore. And that's because you've reached the boundary of your knowledge, or the people around you, or your team's knowledge. And you need you need a different thought process to take you from that 2 to 5 to $10 million. But most people don't know what they don't know. So they never figure out they got to bring in more people. And the other reason why businesses fail at that point is because if you're a business, you can get to $1 million in revenue through brute force and ignorance and just working hard. But it's hard to go beyond that unless you bring in technology and the right people, and you start to build a team. And that generally takes your revenue down, right? So you might have, because you need enterprise solutions to get to the next stage, you might want to bring in Salesforce. There's a cost, right? So all of these costs bring your cash flow down before it goes up. And there's a whole theory there that if you're making good money, should you even go to the next stage? I've worked with, and very few people can answer that honestly. I worked with a business about 6 months ago, and they were at $5 million, and they wanted to know how to get to the next stage. And I said, do you really want to go to the next stage? Because it's going to cost you money to get there. It's not like we can pull it out of thin air. Online you can do a lot of stuff, right? But eventually you're going to have to spend money. So last night, for example, I was working with a young man who is doing exceptionally well, but he takes 95% of his profit and just saves it, right? So I said, well, how do you expect to grow? So he said, what would you do with that 95%? I said, I'd figure out how to get another 5% and put all of it back into the business, right? So you're never going to get the return that you're going to get in a business that you are in a bank account or bonds, shares, wherever it is. The best money that you're ever going to have, which is a Berkshire Hathaway thing, right? If he can figure out how to earn more from his dollar somewhere else, he will. Otherwise, it stays there.
We sound very similar, Mark, actually. I'm not sure how much longer we have you tonight for our audience.
But as long as you'd like.
I sure would hate for you not to share some of the insights that you've had by working and looking at these companies that you've checked out, much like Andrew Carnegie.
Well, one of the things, I mean, you've got a group in America called, I think it's called Vistage, which is a group of CEOs that meet. Vistage, yeah. And here they call it TEC, the Executive Connection. So once a month, the requirement for the group that I was in was you had to have a revenue of over $3 million, and you would meet with 15 people once a month who were a diverse group of business people, so you wouldn't have 2 accountants or 2 lawyers, and you would try and help solve each other's problems. Mm-hmm. And in that group, I was fortunate enough to have 2 people who ran $2 billion companies. And my question was, what does your day look like? If you're on $1 billion, you know, that's what I want to know. And everything else is interesting, but I want to know what goes through your head when you run $1 billion a day company. And I can't remember the expression he uses. Says, I wipe noses and wipe arses most of the time, Mark. And he said, it's all about people. He said, it's really all about people. Yeah. And I spoke to another guy that had ran $1 billion company. And I had a mentor, actually, who ran $1 billion a year company. But this one guy, I was asking him about time management. And he did this with a piece of paper, and he threw it over his shoulder. He said, time management is for my secretary. I don't have time management. I do what I want. He said, if you've got a to-do list, you're doing the wrong thing. So, you know, it's not how I would approach it, but you need to be listening to people like that and asking questions. So I asked another very successful man last week, and I ask everybody, you know, like, is that inquiring mind? If you could look back to let me ask both of you, all 3 of you actually. This is a good question for you. So I'll start with you, David. If you could look back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give yourself right now?
Don't get married yet.
Good for you.
Well, that would be one, and the other would be I worked my rear end off for a big company. And I'm not, well, in fact, I am sure that, you know, I had wonderful experiences there. I got to do more interesting things than almost anybody else there. But in the end, there wasn't any reward. And so I think the other advice would be, you know, to have gone to work for a startup somewhere at night on weekends or whatever, and or you know, invest in real estate and, you know, build some wealth outside of that corporate job. Good advice. I think those would be the 3 things. Don't get married yet. You know, get involved in some kind of startup, moonlighting, and you know, forget about a house. You know, buy a small apartment building or something, and live in an apartment, and, you know, improve the rest of the thing.
Great advice, Ron.
That's an easy one for me. And I've found this to be the case with a number of my mentors and friends around me. When I went to school, I was always the top in the class. Whether it was high school, college, et cetera, learning the technical things was easy for me. But when I started working for a big Fortune 100 company, about age 25, it hit me. It's the critical soft skills that make the difference in execution, that make the difference in innovation, that make the difference in having people feel like $1 million that they come to work every day. And so I dedicated my life since about age 25, learning those critical soft skills, things like mediation, things like collaborative problem solving, conflict resolution, accordion planning, which is probably a term you haven't heard, where you involve the key stakeholders from the very beginning on execute. You work on execution with the key stakeholders from the very beginning. And I could go on all night about examples, but it's the stuff that's not taught in the high schools and the colleges, these critical soft skills. So I would tell my 18-year-old self to start earlier, because the magic in life has to do with the critical soft skills.
Absolutely. And interestingly enough, I over the last few years, there's a company called Upwork. It used to be called Odesk. I don't know if yeah, you know that company. I've hired maybe 500 people from there in the last few years, and you get a score as an employer, just the same way you can give them a score. And mine's is nearly 5 out of 5. And one of the reasons is exactly that, Ron, is I've realized that in order to make something happen, you've got to lead. Right, and you got to have that culture, and people have got to believe in something. Right? They've got to be, more excited to go to work than stay in bed. But those soft skills, and yeah, I could go on there a long time. And Kevin,
well, if we want the I've been thinking about this a lot lately in my own life. So, yeah, I'm at one of those. I'm at the, pivot points, Mark.
Yep.
I'm at a very big pivot point in my own life. So mine would be to find peace. But here's the flip side of that. I went all over the world doing a lot of stuff and did a lot of things because I never had internal peace. So that brought me to here. And so all those crazy experiences, all those countries and everything else was me just trying to be at peace with myself. And so that pain drove my life. And it was a very uncomfortable thing to go through because I didn't have internal peace. So I would say that, because I think that is more important than the success that I've had in the past. But this is why I'm kind of, after this entire journey of self that I've been on, I'm excited about the future, is because if I did all of that before, when I was in pain, how awesome is the future going to be when I'm happy? And so looking at it from an existential point of view, the pain drove me to go all over the world and be an entrepreneur and just never give up. But on the flip side, it was painful. So going back, I'm glad I went through it. So if we want to look at it from a non-existential point of view, I would say stay in San Francisco because I made the decision to go to Sacramento because it was more fun. And San Francisco was, I missed, let's just say I missed millions because I pursued fun. But other than that, yeah, that's my answer.
Isn't that interesting that they're all similar in a different perspective? Because if you think of Dave, about he worked for a long time for a company, never got those rewards, and Ron realizing that it's really the soft skills and yourself that is a step towards yourself, which is happiness. And I think that that is one of the problems with business as well, where I said it's 80% psychological. Because if you show me a broken business, I'll show you a broken person, right? Yeah. That's one of the things that you're going to see in that. But one of the things I've realized is I've started to, and I'm still not good at it, but I try to get rid of ego, right? So I'm doing things now, not because I want to impress my wife or my children or my friends or whatever else. That step forward for me is I want to be the best, emotionally, spiritually, financially, physically, the best version of me that I can be. And that is my journey. It's not anybody else's. And it's a journey alone to a lot of degree. We can talk about it and share it, but it's a journey that you take alone. And to kind of circle back around there, I asked somebody a few weeks ago the same question, and he said to me, if I had to do that when I was a younger man, I would be the type of person who would never be afraid to ask the question. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, the girl that you want to go out with, he said, I was too afraid to ask that person. The job that I wanted, I was too afraid to ask for that job. The thing that I wanted to do, I was too afraid to do it inside my head. And he was in his 70s, and he was a successful man. He said, but I could have had a different life if I had just not been afraid to ask the right questions. And it's that, every opportunity you get, you can learn from the people around you. I've learned from this conversation. But I always love to ask that question because, you know, it's a shortcut to where you want to go.
Mark,
yeah, go on.
Real quick, I just want to build on your comment. There's a fellow I found called Richard Rohr. He wrote a book called Falling Upward, and the case he makes is at some point, all our lives, all of us work on the outside of the container. We work on the container. We care about how we look. We care about who the friends we have are, the houses we have, the hobbies we have. But we're working on the container. Now, most of us work on the container until the moment before we pass away. But there is a point that all of us reach at some point along the journey that we realize what's really important is what's inside the container. And go ahead.
You know, I think we are very much like that. There was a time for about a year where I had quite a lot of success in my mid-30s, and I went and, you know, stayed by the beach and tried to drink myself to death and tried to find myself, right? And it got so, you know, but the way my brain works is I'm looking at the sea every day and I'm trying to count how many waves there are. And then I'm meditating and I'm thinking every time the wave comes in, is money coming into my bank account. And that's all I could think of, looking at the sea. Money's coming in, money's coming in. But how, you know, your mind is really what's going to determine everything. You know, that your success or your failure is really revolves around how you look at that.
Yeah, well said. Well said. And I find it to be true. Well, the interesting thing was when I first read the book from Richard Rohr, Falling Upward, I was going through a marriage divorce, and I was heading in a spiritual direction. But the light that really came on later, months and years later, is how this is at the core of the business world. This is core, as you said. You know, if you look at any broken business, you'll find broken people, broken leaders.
Well, let me ask Kevin this. And because you're on this introspective journey, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail?
What would I do if I knew I couldn't fail?
Yeah. It would change things. Yeah.
If you could do anything that you knew absolutely you wouldn't fail.
Right.
Because that's my starting point, really.
Yeah. Here's the interesting point. I already feel like that. That's the problem. And what I'm trying to do is I'm holding myself back to making sure that my family's okay. Let me rewind this a bit. I've always been, I know I'm not afraid of myself. I already know, like, when I apply myself, that's why I'm very careful about who I do business with or what I'm going to do. My decisions on who I choose to allow in my business has been a consistent factor of failure points. That and my own self-destructive nature. I got rid of that years ago, the self-destructiveness. Then I worked on the people, and I've taken shortcuts, knowing that they're not the right sort of people to be doing business with and all that stuff. So the shortcuts are my biggest issue, and that's why now I'm just kind of staying in the question. So I already know whatever I apply, because I've been like that my whole life. Whatever I do, I know I'm going to get it. But the problem is hanging on to it. And that's where I'm at now is I can't put my family through another bell curve. I can't, because that's my issue. My issue isn't getting there. The issue is once I'm there, did I build up the foundation of support around it? Did I pick the right people? Am I going to get this stolen again? Because as soon as money reveals people, as soon as you make money, it reveals who they really are, what their motivations are. So it's the same thing about pain. If you're going through a long and then all of a sudden there's pain, you see how people react to that. So my thing is now that I'm a family man, and that brings me so much peace and joy, is where do I go from here? Because there's a big trade-off from the old Kevin, which was balls to the wall. versus the Kevin now where it's like, okay, I can't do that again to my family. And I don't have an answer for that, I guess. But if I knew it couldn't fail, what would I do in terms of a business? I'm doing it. You know what I mean? It's you know.
Well, the second part of that question is, if you know, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? What would be the type of person? Would it be different from who you are now? So, what is that? Does that person look something different from on that journey to get to that end goal? Which comes down to what Ron was saying. It's really all about what's in your head. What's those beliefs. And it's like you said, the people who are around you. I try and limit now. I basically don't watch news. I'm try to be careful about people around me. If there's anybody who's negative, I'm a family guy. I've got 3 kids and a wife, and they're always trying to take me out to event when pre-corona to meet this person, that person, and that person. And the majority of the time, I'm not interested because they're not my type of people. And they've all got problems, and all they want to talk about is the problems. I don't have time in my life for that type of person. So I just don't go. So I'm only going to ever allow the right information into my head, because it's hard enough with everybody else's shit being piled on you.
Right, exactly. Yeah, here's the interesting thing. You talk about where we're at. So one of my biggest goals is I've recognized that this is a place to retire. It's not a place to grow. And it's because the infrastructure, the culture, everything around you is like briar patches pulling you down. Or, you resemble the soil you planted in. And when I was in Australia, I was wildly successful. When I was in the States and whatever, I was very successful because I was in circles that were always pushing me forward and lifting up. And I used to do something called Breakfast of Champions every Tuesday. And, in Australia, and we would go to a 5-star hotel and we would have breakfast. And it would always be at like 6 in the morning, 7 in the morning. It would be very early. And it was something I really looked forward to. Then we went to every 2 weeks. And part of my group, it was like, all C-level executives of international stuff. One was an author with 14 books. He was a lawyer. He's head of strategy. And when I was there with those people, great things were just via osmosis. And we would all talk about where we were at. And I was helping the head of strategy for News Limited. And they're like, hey, what should we do? I said, invest in Web 2.0. What should we buy? Buy MySpace. 3 days later, announcement. They were going to buy MySpace. And he goes, hey, I'm going to make this announcement tomorrow. What do you think about this? And that stuff was happening. And I was going to London and all that stuff. So I came here and I kind of I resembled the soil I got planted in. And that concept, that mental framework is why I realized all of a sudden, okay, this is where I'm at. This is what I have to do. And then for a long time, that fear of, wow, leaving what became comfortable into the unknown, and can I really do this again? And so that's where I'm at now. So your questions are really hitting it.
Well, just to talk about more, just I don't want to harp on about it, but when I had my time on the beach, it was a similar experience to you. But when you remove the need to make money, right? If you wake up tomorrow and you do not need to make money, right? It's very easy to self-destruct. So life has a flow. Like whatever your daily routine is, it's got a kind of flow. And if you land up at the beach or where you are right now, you remove yourself from that flow. And the first thing that happens is you forget what day of the week it is, right? Because who cares? You're not interested. And that's why you said that it's a good place to retire, but not a good place to grow. When you go into that stage, there's no growth, right?
Yeah, the culture's not here. The people aren't. Nothing in this energy is growth related. Even because the culture is tribal and systemic, it's much different here than, for example, across the way in South Korea. It's much different here than it is in Vietnam. It's much different here than in Singapore. And that's a relative thing that it's taken me. I didn't realize this till November of last year, and I've been here 14 years. And I kept wondering, why does this keep happening? And then all of a sudden, I called up a buddy of mine in Australia, and he goes, mate, I keep telling you. And that was the that was my shining moment when I realized that success is also all the internal stuff. But if you don't have any support network, you don't have anybody that even speaks to you. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm like a spaceman here. You know, nobody understands what's going on. I'm like the only, and without being anything about race, I'm like the only white guy in town, and there's 400,000 people here. Maybe I've seen 3 guys here. So there's nobody that has a cultural exchange that that's the same. Now in Manila, it's different. I've got a lot there. But the point being is, I'm resembling the soil I've planted myself in. It's a great place to be, a great place to raise a family. It's not necessarily the best place to be an innovation and business leader. And I had to make that choice, and I didn't realize that. You know, you go from living in San Francisco, and you're like, yeah, wow, I can employ 4 people, developers, for the price of 1. What you don't realize is, and you've mentioned this about Upwork, you now have to worry about infrastructure. You have to worry about mindset. You have to spend, you know, that's another thing too about the gig economy is the reason people fail at outsourcing is they have no human resource skills. You can't be an expert internet marketer. You can't be an expert business guy and then just assume you're going to be able to hire somebody across the world to get the work done. It doesn't work like that. You actually have to have human resource. You have to be able to convey and understand where those you have to meet people where they are. And the issue is you get so focused once you're here in meeting people where they are that you forget where you are. And that is what's happened to me is I one of the best things that ever occurred to me was having the daily podcast with Ron and David, because it forced me every day to have just, you know, wow, this is where I'm at. This is where I'm at. And I've seen, and even my wife has said, this is probably the most mentally healthy thing you've ever done. And I think that's really what it comes down to is I found happiness in myself. And then I was afraid to like, let that go and go back into the world. Anyway.
Interesting. Just before we, Ron and David, I'm curious that because you both teach business as well, right? Is there,
sort of, yeah.
Is there a commonality with the people who, let's say you've got X amount of students? Can you identify if you have a group of students who you think is going to be successful and who isn't?
I don't think I've figured out how to do that yet. It's interesting. So we're not faculty. We're kind of like advisors to. We're a board of directors for a simulated business. Okay, so students get in a group of 5 or 6, and they have a computer simulated competition against other students' teams. So they sell watches, right? And the course is called Management Game. And each of these teams, they have roles in their company. So you have the president, the chief financial officer, marketing officer, and so on. And so we're the outside board of directors. 2 semesters back, I was surprised. There were, I think, six guys on the team, and 5 of them, all but one in any case, were on the football team. And I had never experienced that before. And I remembered what the guys in the football team were like when I was there, and they were not top of the class. And they drank a lot, and their advisor, got them into the easier classes and begged with the professors for them to have leniency and so on. So, that was the picture in my mind. Well, these guys were on top of it, and they I think the winning factor for them was teamwork. So they practiced football, every day together, and they had done that for 4 years, and then they're in this management game where they have to work as a team to compete against other teams in this simulated business. They mopped up the place. But seeing their bios before meeting them, I'm like, oh well, we'll see how this works out. And they just cleaned the house. This last semester, we had an all Chinese team. A couple from Taiwan, one from mainland, a couple from the United States, but they still had connections in mainland China, and very smart. And they didn't do badly, but the first year of the simulation they did terribly, and then they got their act together and they did very well, and so they finished well, but they didn't mop up the room like the previous team had done. So it's hard to know. They're all smart. Every one of the students is smart, talented. They got all kinds of good things going for them. But by and large, the teams that Ron and I are associated with do very well. And they blame it on their board of directors, and I don't know if that's true, but we have a philosophy as a board that not every board has, and that is, we're not here to play game. I had my chance when I was their age. So I'm not here to make the moves and the decisions and so on. We're there really to ask questions, so that when they say we're going to do X, Y, and Z, we'll challenge it. We won't tell them that's a bad idea, but we ask them questions that make them more certain maybe of the decisions that they're making, and by and large they do very well with that. But no, if you have the secret, tell me. But I have
no,
not
I don't.
figured out.
That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, Ron,
I just wondered whether you could see something.
Yeah.
Ron?
Yeah, I think I'm onto something here on that, Mark. That's a great question. I've been thinking about this. How do you pick out the people that are going to be strong performers, the winners, the people that flourish? And it comes down to awareness. I've been putting some words to paper here, and you can only experience what you're aware of. You also can only experience what you are in vibrational alignment with. Your awareness reveals your vibration. And I'm going to tell you an example in a second here. Your vibration is a direct reflection of your inner thoughts, feelings, beliefs, choice of words, self-image, and the way you care. The way you care. Do you ever meet somebody that just, you can tell how they really care about their business?
Sure.
And this past semester with the Chinese team, and by the way, Dave is doing an incredible job for God only knows 20 years with these kids. But I caught the vibe with the team. The team, about halfway through the semester, on a rainy night at Carnegie Mellon.
It was at the end of the first year of simulation. So It was like a third of the way through. Yep.
Exactly. So this was unprepared, but we were all outside because we were told to evacuate the building.
Yeah, there was a fire alarm.
And it just spurted out of me. The words spurted out. I simply said, are you guys playing to win or trying not to lose? And they were stunned. They were absolutely stunned. But the moment froze in time. And we went on to talk about this. But what I said, show of hands, are you playing to win? How many of you are playing to win? And how many of you are playing not to lose? And what was it, Dave? Most of the class.
Yeah, it was. I think there might have been one of them that said playing to win, and the others said admitted playing not to lose. And now remember, they got beat up. They made some decisions that didn't work out. The other teams made moves that they weren't expecting them to make, and so in the big cauldron of everything getting stirred together, they got beat up, and they were surprised how badly they got beat up, and so, but they admitted though that they were playing not to lose, and that was probably how they got exactly where they were, because if you play not to lose, you're not going to win.
And David can verify this, but their performance from that point on flourished. They were starting to meet more often with each other. They had an issue about, I don't have time to meet with my teammates. I have another class. It's second my time. They actually went to their faculty instructor and tested what the rules were. So in other words, the point is, through a variety of techniques, they expanded their awareness. And the more they expanded their awareness, the better they flourished. Is that, Dave, am I close?
Yeah, they weren't, what we uncovered from that conversation was that they weren't putting adequate effort into this class. And you have whatever excuses you have, but they weren't putting in adequate effort, and they weren't working properly as a team. And Mark, this is an interesting class because if the teamwork isn't there, you can't. It's designed so that all the pieces have to be working together, or it's not going to work. They just weren't working together well as a team. They weren't making decisions together. They weren't looking over each other's shoulders, with like a buddy system. And when we were let back in the building, we reviewed maybe some ideas that they could implement to work as a team better, and they did exceedingly well in the next 2 years of the simulation. So they took a lot of things to heart, and I have to think if Ron hadn't asked that question, the outcome might have been very different than it was.
It's a great question.
And it's because of just a little thing, Mark, and you can share your thoughts. Performance Tailwinds has been seeing this need in a variety of venues, and we're so committed to this mastering of the mind, mastering our internal operating system, maximizing vibration, expanding awareness, that we've created a cluster of offerings that we're making available for the public that we can talk about sometime when you're available. We could, believe it or not, I never thought I'd see this day, but we actually have an offering where we can actually assess people's awareness and their vibration. Honestly, I never thought I'd say that.
It's a very cool thing.
Just to bring those 2 points together between teamwork and playing not to lose, I spent an hour on a phone last week with one of the most amazing men I've ever spoken to, and his name is Patch Baker. And you can see him online. And he was in the U.S. Army and in the Special Forces, and he gets shot in the chest, right? And at the end of his tour of duty, he decides that he wants to go and learn how to do online marketing. Now, how would a normal person figure that out? How you would do online marketing? Here's his solution about playing not to lose. He gets in his car, he drives halfway across America to Facebook's security gate, knocks on the door and says, "I'm a veteran, I want to learn how Facebook works." Right? And the guy's like,
I love it.
What? He calls the head of security, who comes down, who's a veteran also, and he says, "Look, I'll let you in for 15 minutes, show you around." They love him. Spends the whole day in Facebook. They teach him. He's got photographs with them on stage with Facebook. They're having a meeting with Facebook. He becomes like this expert in Facebook. At one point, he was spending more now. He's spending $1 million a month on Facebook advertising. He's worth incredible. He's buying a bank now, right? He just buys businesses. But this playing not to lose is, and if you're, apparently if you're in those teams, it has to be a team effort You know, they don't do things alone. So it brings those 2 points together. It's got to be a team, and playing not to lose is not just not playing not to lose. It's what's the biggest jump you can take. You know, what is that big end goal? It would never have occurred to me to go to Facebook and ask them, how does Facebook work? But it's just so logical, really, if you think about it.
Expanded awareness.
And
Mark, I'm curious. What's next for you?
I would like to get to the stage where I have a portfolio of businesses where I can add, and it'd probably be about 10. And I can't see me having the bandwidth for much more than that, but where I could be an advisor to each of those businesses. And there would be enough differences there to keep me interested, but to help those businesses grow and be involved with them, because your business nowadays is part of your life. In the old days, you know, the 50s and 60s, you went to your job, you came back. But now people who have a business, it goes with them. It goes with them to the beach on their phone. It goes here. It's everywhere. It's this. So, you know, that building that lifestyle is what I'm interested in. But what's next for me is I spend 80% of my day looking at deal flow, looking at businesses where I think I understand and I think I could add value. And I like the people. I mean, I won't buy a business just because it makes money if, you know, the people are not nice. I got to be able to get on with them and have a bit of a laugh. So it's a bit of both things. So what's next for me is I think, like we were speaking about the failure rate of startups, I've realized that the fastest way to grow is actually to buy revenue, not grow it. And it takes away that part of, you know, if you want to start a business, it takes X amount of years and it can fail along the way. But if you buy a business that's been going for 10 years and it's got reasonably steady revenue and EBIT or EBITDA, you know, I'd rather do that than go and recreate the wheel.
Interesting.
Yeah, you've passed 95% of the failure opportunities.
Exactly.
If you go in at that point, yeah. And so you've got a real thing. Absolutely.
So that's what I'm excited about. That gets me, you know, I've got, every day I'm talking to somebody, I'm learning something about their business. I'm learning something new, even if I don't do business with them. And I'm getting to hear incredible stories. I'm like, you know, Patch. And the reason I went to Patch, I did the same thing that he did, but in a minor. Somebody told me, you got to talk to this guy. He's on fire. You know, he's doing things you just can't imagine. So I arranged to call him up, and my intention was to say to him, you know, if you do this many deals, there's got to be deals that are too small for you or you don't like. Give them to me. I'll give you a cut, and I'll take care of the whole thing for you. That was my strategy of trying to grow quicker. And he's a really interesting guy. And he said, that's it, Patch Baker. Looks like a serious dude, but he's actually probably is. But he, you know, in person, he's a great character and very helpful and prepared to give people time. And but he said, listen, Mark, if the deal's any good, I'm going to take it. I'm not going to give it to you. And if I don't take it, you're really wasting your time. He's that kind of, you know, it's like no bullshit. It's like straight to you just know when you're dealing with him, you get a good answer. But, you know, so I want to be him when I grow up. I want to have that confidence in myself to not to worry about not failing or succeeding, but take the big jump, you know, so that somebody explained to me the other day that they said to me, what's the fastest way between A and B? And I said, what's a straight line? He said, no, just get rid of the line and just go to B. Forget the line, right? So, you know, how do you do that? So I'm trying to surround myself with people like Patch and other people. So I'm in a group of people. Yesterday, I met with a group of investors who are my peers. They've got more experience. You know, there's like 1,000 different ways to close a deal. Ways I don't know. So I'm learning that. I'm learning the things you should and shouldn't do. How to buy, you know, some deals without any money. Because you eventually run out of money. So how do you solve that problem? How do you find investors? How do you get those deals done? But that's what's next for me, Dave, that's the thing that's exciting me and makes me want to get up in the morning, is that every day is the potential to do a new deal.
Are you looking to own 100% of these 10 businesses?
No.
Or so you're just looking to take a position in roughly 10 businesses?
Well, yes. So it depends on the business, but I have two strategies. One is typically if somebody wants to exit a business, and there's a lot of baby boomers out there that don't have an exit plan, or they want out, or whatever, and they're going to give you.
I've had that conversation a few times. Yeah.
So they're going to give you super terms on a deal. They might give you an earn-in, or they might, you're going to get really good terms. In those cases, then yes, if I've got the skills and the team, I'll take over that business. But I'm happy, I don't want to have 51% or run a business, and the person who really should be running it or owning it feels like it's not his anymore. So I'm happy to take any percentage, as long as it makes sense. And, the reason they would have me as a partner is because they see value. But it doesn't bother me. I don't have the ego to own everything.
Are there particular geographies or industries that you are wanting to focus in?
No, here, if it's offline, I prefer if it's in Australia. I would also tackle Singapore and the UK. I'm from the UK, and you have to usually you go via Singapore to Dubai, so it would be okay with owning physical businesses in those countries, but predominantly Australia for physical businesses, and online anywhere. There's no geographical location. So I talk to people from everywhere. I bought a SaaS company. I did a deal with a SaaS company about 2 weeks ago. I've never met them. And everybody that's in the deal pipeline right now, I'll never meet them ever. And my own team, I've had people working for me for 10, 15 years I've never met. So I went on a tour a couple of years ago in the Mediterranean in a ship, and we stopped at all these ports. And every time there was a port, I had a staff member come and we'd have a cup of tea or coffee or lunch. I'd never met them. And that was the first time I'd seen some of them in person. And they're all just like you see them, and they're exactly the same. There was only one guy who was a difference because he had one of those really loud voices, and I always imagined him to be about 6'4" tall. And when I met him, he was like 5'2", and his voice didn't match. But everybody else was the same.
That's hilarious. Yeah, when you said that, I thought it was shocking, and then I realized it's the same thing. I've had people I've been working with since 2008, 2009. I've never met in person.
Yeah.
The world is a village
easy enough. It's easy enough now. We've consumed a good chunk of the day, or the beginning of your day, Mark. Anyhow,
I've enjoyed it.
Yeah, absolutely. Time has been flying, and I could go for another. I could triple the time. But Kevin or Ron, do you have other things you'd like to cover before we let this man go buy a business?
Yeah. Well, thanks, Mark. I really appreciate it today. I didn't even realize we had done on an hour and a half. I thought we were just like 40. I thought half the time. So
thank you, Kevin.
Thank you today.
Mark, would you want us to come back?
Sure.
I feel like this conversation is just starting.
I think so too. And I'm also happy to help in any endeavor that you think I could add value to. So if ever there's a group of people, or there's something you would like me to talk to, or there's something that I can give, or you think that, in fact, what you can do if you've got students, that VSPO formula is $1,000 course. I'm happy to award it to 10 people that you think are fitting for that course.
That's gratitude right there.
I'll take it.
I'll fix you guys up with it. Once Kevin just gives me your email addresses, I'll put you in the course.
That would be pretty cool. And maybe we should talk with you about partnering with you on that course. So who knows?
So you just made a deal.
And so a homework assignment here for you, Mark, if I can do that, is how can we help you? Maybe by the next time we meet, you might have
you have already. It's always, I am always nervous about meeting people who are more experienced than me, and particularly academics, that in some way, I'm never sure whether I'm adequate or I have good enough answers. So being so comfortable in this group, it has been fantastic. So I think, how can you help me? Just spread the word if ever there's a chance. If ever there's a deal that that somebody wants out, or they want to sell, or whatever, just pass it on to me.
Okay, cool. Excellent.
Thank you, guys.
Okay. Mark, thank you so much. It was a very interesting talk here.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Spread the word.